and welcome to Graywood Gardening. I have to say I'm incredibly impressed with how the Wildflower meadow area of the yard is doing. I really wasn't expecting to get much flowers until August, given how late I actually got the seeds in. But a couple of weeks ago we started seeing these little tiny white flowers speckled throughout the whole area. And now, just in the past few days, we've had the blue cornflowers, pink and orange and yellow California poppies, the yellow coreopsis, this bright pink guy, I don't even know what he is, and we have a lot more coming in. So it looks fantastic. Anytime you're out here, there's always multiple butterflies and dragonflies floating over the area. At night, it's filled with fireflies. It's really exciting. It's particularly impressive considering, one, well, after I tilled it, we had a lot of grass coming up, and I was really worried that the grass was going to choke out the seeds. And two, most of the seeds that I put down are actually perennials, and they're not going to bloom until next year. They're just growing this year and getting established. So I'm very, very happy with the effect that we had, and I can't wait to see what it looks like throughout the rest of the year. Well, it is July here in Minnesota, and that means the weather is hot and it is humid. And the last thing you want to do is do any kind of work outside that is more strenuous than maybe some deadheading and some harvesting. So I actually, on this video, will try to avoid doing any kind of work outside. What I will be doing is hanging out in the garage and sorting through and cleaning out some pots to store them for next year. I will happily take you guys outside for a tour of the favorite weeds I have found growing around the property. And what I'm most excited about is it is time to taste test the spruce-infused gin that we made out of the spruce tips back at the end of May. It's been over a month. Time to see what that actually tastes like. But before we can get started with that, we gotta hop into the basement and get a little bit of work done. Welcome to the seed starting layer where it is cool and completely empty. But it won't be for long because now is the time to start thinking about fall crops. And so today I am going to be planting out some broccoli. Now, broccoli is a cool weather crop that's normally thought of as a spring crop. The idea is to try to plant the broccoli out as soon as possible in hopes that it grows to maturity before it gets too hot out, which can cause the broccoli to bolt prematurely and then ruin your crop, which I have definitely had happen. Now, another way to grow broccoli is to grow it as a fall crop, in which case we plant it inside now, basically any time in July. So it's the middle of July now, which is perfect. And for the next 4 weeks, it'll stay inside where it's cool and doesn't have to contend with the terrible, terrible heat of summer. And then we will plant it out in August, probably a couple of weeks into August, after the worst of the heat is gone and it starts to cool off. Then the broccoli will begin forming its head in September when it's much cooler and there's not really much danger of premature bolting. Whew. Now, the really risky thing about this endeavor is the fact that I currently do not yet have a place to plant the broccoli. And Mrs. Graywood has also requested some cauliflower. So my bet is that I will build and fill a couple more beds before it's time to plant these out. So here's hoping that works out. So starting broccoli is just like starting almost any other kind of seed. Just want to put, usually you want to put like 2 or 3 seeds per compartment, and then when they come up, thin it down. This is not actually a whole lot of seeds, so I might just do 1 seed per, and then come back and add more later if I have enough. Though I am accidentally getting a couple seeds in a few of these. Look at that, I even have a couple left over. What I really should have done here, I should have watered this down before I planted, but it's done now. And best of all, I probably am not even going to need to put this on heat. I will just cover this, let it sit until it starts to germinate, take the lid off, keep it under the lights, and then sometime in the middle of August, these should be ready to plant out. Hopefully I'll have beds for them. And then sometime in the middle of September, we should be ready to harvest broccoli if everything goes well. A good job for a hot, hot summer day is standing in the garage and sorting through the giant pile of pots that you inevitably accumulate during planting season, figuring out which ones you want to keep, which ones you want to get rid of, the ones that you're keeping, getting them cleaned out. Also, it helps to have a ginormous fan right next to you when you're doing this, which I'll be turning on as soon as I stop talking. So, first step that I always go through is I cut off all of the little tags, and then I just make a pile of what I'm going to keep, because I might use it next year or in a future year, and what I just have no use for and what has to go. Step one, turn on the fan. I've never seen tags secured with metal bands before. That's crazy. Okay, so this is what I think I'm going to keep for next year. The next step is to take all of these and wash them out with the hose. So maybe I can find a shady spot on the driveway to do that. Okay, next step is just to hose these out. We don't want to leave any chunks of dirt or debris in there. It's not important to scrub them beautifully clean and be perfect. We really just don't want that little coating of dust and dirt that's inside them to stay around. If you have children slightly older than I do, this might be a great job for them because they can get each other soaking wet. The wind keeps changing direction on me. I shouldn't be complaining about the wind. It's the only thing that's making the weather bearable. Alright, so at this stage in the process, the typical advice is what you should do next is soak all of these pots and sterilize them in an incredibly strong 10% bleach solution. Now the logic behind sterilizing them is that you might have some kind of bacteria or fungus or something lingering in your pots that can stay there all year and wake up when you replant and then cause damping off of your seedlings when you try to grow them the next year. Personally, I've never done the sterilizing. in bleach, and if you're going to do it, you don't need to use 10%. I've never done the sterilizing in the bleach solution. I've never had problems with damping off or growing seedlings. I do think that if you were growing something that got diseased of any kind, then you should absolutely sterilize that pot. But I think for the home gardener, it is not necessarily to go through the sterilization process. It is very, very nice to get everything clean, get all the dirt out, have all your pots ready to go for the next year. But this is the stage where we can say we are done. Once these are dry, they're going to go on the shelves in the basement. The only important thing is to make sure that these do have a chance to get completely dry, including between the pots if you have them stacked like I do, before you put them away to make sure you don't get junk growing on them. All right, that is done. Time to go back inside. We just had a huge downpour, which means we have like a half-hour window of time where it's bearable to be outside. Because while it's still incredibly humid, the temperature has temporarily dropped, but pretty soon it's going to be back up to almost 90. So I thought I would take advantage of this window of time to do a quick tour of my favorite weeds that I have found on the property. And topping the list is definitely common milkweed. This is Asclepias syria, I don't know, Asclepias something. It is a weed that you'll find all over Minnesota. There are much prettier versions of milkweed, including butterfly weed, but the common milkweed is the primary food source for monarch butterfly caterpillars, which is the main reason we kept a bunch of it here when we found it growing in the cottage garden. But also, the fragrance of these flower clusters is amazing. If you stand even just near the garden, you can smell this incredibly heavy scent wafting out. It's like you're standing near lilac or rose bushes. It's really, really strong and really amazing. It's worth noting that the sap of milkweed, which is the reason it's called milkweed, is it has this milky white sap on the leaves when you tear them open. It is toxic. Both to people and animals if you eat it. On the other hand, it also tastes really gross, so most animals don't eat it. You do want to wash your hands carefully if you rip up milkweed and get this white stuff on your hands. It's particularly bad if you get it in your eyes, and apparently the symptoms don't show up right away, so a lot of people don't realize how their eyes got messed up. But, I mean, for the most part, it's a delightful plant. It adds some nice height and structure to the garden. And of course it brings tons of butterflies in, and it smells amazing. And that and many other reasons is why milkweed is my favorite weed on the property. But there are many other weeds that I found that I am quite fond of as well. Let's take a look. Look at these crazy things. I had never seen this weed before this year, and now it's popping up all over the banks on either side of the veggie garden and a few other places in the property. My mother-in-law knows this as cowboy toilet paper. And indeed, the leaves to this thing are huge, and they're incredibly soft and fuzzy. In fact, it's a lot like lamb's ear. And they're nice and thick and sturdy, so I can see how this would make pretty great toilet paper, which I guess makes this part the cowboy. So I looked this up, and this weed is actually called common mullein, also known as grape mullein. And while it's not invasive, it is not native, and it's classified as weedy, because every one of these flowers on this huge stalk will form a pod that's filled with hundreds of seeds. So you can see how these things would spread really, really fast. On the bright side, they are a biennial, which means that by the time they flower, this is their second year, and they will be done after this year. So at some point, I need to come around and just chop all of these things down before they go to seed, and then that'll be the end of them. But this is just an impressive volume of biomass that was created really in just a couple months out of water and sunshine. And that's what makes this one of my favorite weeds. But there's more. Save this for later. Look at this monster thistle. This thing is incredible, and I've been waiting for this to bloom for over a month because I've been watching this stalk grow up and get higher and higher and higher, and then split off into like 24 separate branches. I've never seen a thistle this big before, and it's amazing. And this isn't the only one. we have thistle like this growing up all over the place. Obviously, thistle is not most people's favorite flower. It is very prickly, and you don't want to grab it and pull it out. You really want to get a shovel. But I always thought thistles were kind of pretty, and certainly the wildlife loves them. We see bees and butterflies on them all the time, and as they go to seed, the goldfinches come and eat the seed out. So I personally, Mrs. Graywood's not a fan, I personally really like the crazy alien monster thistle. But there's another weed just over here that I want to show you. So we have this stuff growing wild all over the property, and this is actually catnip. Every place that we've lived, I've always planted 1 or 2 catnip plants so that I can have some treats to pick and bring in for the kitty. Here I don't have to. The catnip is everywhere. And when it blooms, the flowers aren't that impressive, but the bees love them. These are way more popular than most of the flowers in the cottage garden. And if you don't have cats, the foliage actually makes a really nice filler in bouquets. Although if you have cats, don't do that. Your bouquet won't last long. The great thing is, if there's ever any catnip someplace that I don't want it, I can just dig it up and toss it because there's so much catnip in so many other places that there's always plenty for the kitty cat. Oh look, here's some bees now. Okay, it's time for my final favorite weed, which is good because it is getting hot out and the sun's starting to come back out. My final favorite is this wild raspberry. I actually have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with this because it is a thorny bramble and is a pain in the butt to pull out, like I did back in March with the play area. But at this time of the year, I have to say, it's really cool to be able to walk around the property and just pick handfuls of these wild black raspberries and just eat them wherever they grow. And there are some big patches of them in the back of the property behind the woods, and they're pretty good. All right, it's getting hot and steamy out here. It's time for me to head back inside and retreat to the AC. But maybe just for the sake of tidiness, we'll clean some of these guys off of this bush here. Can't leave all of them for the birds. All right, what could be nicer on a hot summer day than a nice cold drink of spruce tree? This is spruce-infused gin. At the end of May, I filled this jar with spruce tips just as they were budding out from the tree, and then poured gin all the way up to the top. I have sealed it and left it sitting in a dark place for the past month and a half or so. So now supposedly this should give like a lovely sprucey lemony citrus hint to the gin. So we're going to try it out today for the first time by making a spruce gin and tonic. The first thing I'm going to do is put some cheesecloth over the cup here to filter out the needles. It smells like a lemony gin. You definitely get that lemony flavor, which I tasted when I tried eating the spruce tips. Let me get some of this out here. All right, so this is a gin and tonic, only with the spruce gin. Let's see if it tastes any different from a normal gin and tonic. That is different. Oh, this is interesting. It definitely has, I don't really taste the lemony flavor that I tasted when I ate the spruce tips, or even that I can kind of smell. Instead, it's really hard to describe. It's a little bit the way that you would expect an evergreen tree to taste based on like the smell of an evergreen tree. It's like a little hint of that in it, and maybe a little bit of that citrus, but it is very different and it's very interesting. It's definitely a very, very fresh flavor, and it's not bad at all. So now I have the tough decision of I can filter out this entire jar and then have a jar of spruce-infused gin, or I can seal it back up, put it someplace dark, and let it age for longer and get more of the spruce flavor infused into the gin. But I can taste a distinct difference here, and this is actually pretty good. So I think it's worth filtering this out, but fortunately, I made 2 jars. So I think I'm gonna pour one of these out, filter it, and stop it now, because I know this is good. And the other jar, I'm gonna toss back someplace dark for another month or another couple months, and see what it tastes like when it has more spruce flavor infused in it. But all in all, I think this was a super successful experiment, and I will absolutely go out again next spring or early summer and picking those spruce tips off so that I can make some more infused spruce gin. Very highly recommended. Alright, and there's the ratio of gin to spruce tips. So that's probably about 2/3 of a jar. Actually, I wonder if these are still good. Interesting. Super bland. This was like really, really tasty when I was eating it just off the tree. And now, I was like, oh, maybe it'll taste like a spruce tip infused with gin. It actually tastes really bland. I think most of the flavor is already out of these. Still have the other jar, still gonna keep it for a month, but I'm betting based on this that month and a half, we've extracted most of the flavor out of this. All right. Look at the progress on this broccoli, and this is just 4 days after planting. It's basically 100% germination. It's doing fantastic. Well, this is everything I have for you on this video. Next time, I think the weather's supposed to be getting a little bit better, so we might try doing some work outside. We certainly need to go out and cut down all that cowboy toilet paper before it goes to seed. I want to do a check-in on the unfortunate progress of the lower terrace garden, and, weather permitting, might be time to get out and start working on laying out some of the in-ground beds that I plan on having in the veggie garden. Alright, well until then, happy gardening.